welcome into episode 9 of Jubilee Gardens. I know it's been a few weeks since we've had an episode out. It's just both CommandoSanta and I have been busy, and he got sick one week, and so we're a couple weeks behind, but we got lots of progress done in this episode. And I guess the story is sort of similar to the last one on my channel of more change, kind of rearranging and reorganizing. But before we get into all of those details, I'll welcome in CommandoSanta. How's it going, man?
Good. How about you?
Good. Like I was telling you before we got into the recording, this was a productive. I guess I only had the park for like a week and a half because we did some changing, but it was productive for me, and normally I'm like all over the map when I'm building, and for whatever reason I just got into a groove here. So this time lapse should be pretty concise for everyone for the first time like ever on my channel. So
that's good.
Yeah.
I know I kind of dropped it on you.
No, it was fine. I mean, it's it just ended up working out well, and I was scheduled to be out of town this weekend, and so that's why it was gonna be on Commando's channel. Plus he was sick, so we were delayed a week, and then my trip ended up being canceled, so I was able to work on it this week, and we were able to record this weekend. So it all worked out fine, and I needed to finish the Jubilee Square anyway. The last time we were on my channel, you'll probably remember I just had some placeholder buildings in for these. So like the one that's on screen right now, before it was Beau's Emporium that was on the other side of Main Street, on that corner. So I wanted something that would have a decent amount of height here, to kind of block off your view of the square from the rest of the area behind it, and also just have a decent front that faced the river, or the canal. So I ended up finding some inspiration in Denver, actually. A couple weeks ago I took a trip there, and we were downtown, and if you've never been to Denver, there's a ton of brick buildings, mainly because it was sort of it was a major rail hub for a period of time, because it was sort of it's not really a major city, but a decent sized city in between like St. Louis and Chicago and California. It was kind of the major stop, and so it was pretty big industrial area, for a period of time. So they have tons of brick buildings. The cool thing is they're not just brick boxes. A lot of them have pretty ornate detail on on their cornices and things like that. So I found a lot of inspiration there, as well as, like I mentioned in the last episode, that the whole square being kind of inspired by Old Town Fort Collins. So this building is inspired by a place in an area called Lodo in Denver called the Wazi Supper Club. So this is the Jubilee Supper Club.
Nice.
And I thought it was... the reason why I picked it is because it had some darker wood trim, and I thought it would be kind of nice to get away from some of the bright whites that we had been going in the Main Street area. So the goal was to give it sort of a similar feel, but at the same time have it stand on its own as well.
Yeah, I really like that. It actually looks really nice, and the hard thing with brick buildings that I find in Planet Coaster is it's really hard to set in windows and doors and stuff into the brick. So you almost have to have like 2 levels of walls so you can make it look like the windows and doors are actually set into the brick and not just like pasted to the front of it,
Yeah. And there's a few on a couple of these buildings where it does look like that, but for the most part on this one I was able to kind of hide them in by using that. I don't even know what the piece is called off the top of my head, but it's that sort of brick accent wall piece.
Yeah.
And that's really versatile. So there's a couple times where I tried to use the brick pillars, but they're just too wide, and they really take up too much space on the face of the wall. And so those pieces I definitely use a ton of in all of these buildings. But yeah, if you can, not just for brick buildings, but really any building, if you can find a way to sort of sink the windows into the walls, it makes a huge difference in the appearance. It definitely will increase your part count, because it probably means using other pieces to sort of hide them, but it definitely it's like a really subtle thing that adds a lot more realism, I think.
I know for a lot of the windows, you can actually set them in on a wall a little bit further than it actually is. This is really hard to explain, but I mean, for most windows, you just kind of paste them to the front, but they actually have some space where you can actually push them into the wall a little bit until it actually covers the glass piece. And I usually do that with everything because it actually makes that trim of the window that much less huge and jutting out, That's what I try and do.
Yeah, less obtrusive. Yeah. It's, and I do the same thing where you put the piece flat to the wall and then use the advanced move tool to just barely sink it in until the glass disappears. And then once the glass disappears, you just move it out very slightly.
Yep.
And then you know that you've got, sort of the maximum amount sunk into the wall as possible.
Yep.
So yeah, that's a technique that helps me a lot too. And here, so I had a bit of a dilemma. So whenever I build, I try as best as I can to keep everything in one building. Instead of having, multiple buildings inside of one structure, I want it all to be one in-game building, I should say. And so this sort of diagonal wall face, I struggled with what to do because if I use the gridded brick walls, I would have had to create a separate building in order to do this. And so what I ended up doing was using the brick columns to sort of give the appearance of that same wall face. So not the best thing for part count, but it definitely helps to have the building all in one if you need to like move it slightly, or even if you want to just save it as a blueprint for other people to use. Stuff like that is helpful. So I'm happy with how that turned out. You'll see I had to use, or I think I'd already showed it, but so those new spooky pieces that are sort of wooden accents there, they're too long for that diagonal face. So what I used was just the regular spooky beams because they're a similar texture. So they don't have the detail, but the texture and the color is the same. And so I used those to sort of mimic that. But everything else has a small enough length that it fit in just fine.
Diagonal pieces are so difficult in this game.
Yeah.
Because
I get some other reason why the grid, I guess I get 100% why the grid stuff doesn't go on a diagonal, but it would be nice if you could group, somehow group diagonal pieces into a structure, like once it's done or something.
Yeah, and whenever you do a diagonal, nothing lines up properly, so it's always just it's an uphill battle. It really is.
Yeah. And it probably happened too quickly in the time lapse, but or maybe I cut it out, I'm not sure, but I actually did struggle with that, of getting it to line up correctly.
Yeah.
Because I had the angle locked and I did a 45 degree angle, which theoretically, that should connect the two perfectly, and it definitely did not.
I had that same issue when I was doing Columbia, because you use the grid, but you save that 45 degree angle spot, and it doesn't line up perfectly at all. Frustrating. So I definitely had to. It's if you look closely, there's definitely some places where it's sort of out of whack, but
I think that's one thing that I've been getting better at in terms of sort of building faster in the game, is not being as anal about those little tiny details that literally no one's ever going to notice when we upload this park someday. So that's helped me a lot, and just for my own sanity too.
It's these little details that only you notice because you're looking that close to it. Yep.
Right.
I'm still stuck on that. I still struggle with that sometimes.
Yeah. I mean, there's times where being a perfectionist takes over, and I'll go back and tweak something because I know it's there and it'll bug me. Yep. But there's certain things where, I think I heard Masked Bandit say it once, like in a Discord conversation, of just being like, sometimes you just have to be okay with good enough.
Yeah.
And that's true. I mean, for time's sake, for your own sanity's sake in this game, sometimes that has to be good enough. And yeah, so I feel like I'm at a better place, from that standpoint.
You're not losing sleep over it.
Right.
Waking up in the middle of the night, oh my God, those pieces aren't lined up.
Exactly. So this building is a building that I was inspired by. There's an area of Denver called Larimer Square. And this building is one of it's not exact, but the color scheme is pretty similar. And I took some of the cues from the cornice. So at first I didn't know about the color, but you'll see in a minute here, I add the awnings that you created on Main Street, I have them saved and sunk underground attached to some of the buildings. So in a minute you'll see I go and grab it from underground and I change the colors on it a little bit and I add the awnings to some of these windows.
Yeah.
And I do a white and a blue, and for whatever reason, so it's the same blue that you see on the Main Street. So that's the reason why I chose it, because I wanted to try to bring some of the Main Street into this area.
Yep.
And for whatever reason, the blue totally makes the building. Because like I said, initially I wasn't completely sold on this color scheme. But in the context of the overall square, when it's all said and done, I'm really happy with how it looks.
Wow.
So
I'm excited to see it now.
Yeah, you'll see that in a second. And then on the bottom part there, I used 2 beams. Yeah, so here we go with those. So I used 2 beams on that bottom part where there's like a carved beam, and then there's just that sort of wooden base beam, and I use that to give it some depth. So you see the white piece and the green piece there.
Wow.
And then so you'll see the awning.
Yeah,
so it totally lightens up the building a little bit, gives it some color. And then I do the same color scheme in the signs here. So I do a vertical sign, and then a horizontal sign above the door. And it just adds a nice touch. And then you won't see it on the time lapse, but we're going to do a real-time segment at the end of the episode. And I added a bunch of like tables with umbrellas, and the umbrellas are that same blue color. And so it ended up just looking really nice, I think.
Yeah, that color makes it really stand out.
Yeah.
Wow, I really enjoyed that.
And like I said, the bonus is that it pulls in that same color from the Main Street, and so that you see continually repeated there. So
yeah, because this is in a section of the square that you see pretty much right when you come from the Main Street down the alleyway, correct?
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Exactly. So and again, I wanted the square to be different from the Main Street, but I also I didn't want it to be so different that you felt like you were sort of stepping into a completely new area from, like a lot of theme parks. The themes are so obviously different that you're completely aware when you walk into a sort of new land. And I didn't want that. So I wanted it to feel different from the Main Street, but also have enough cohesion that, the two sort of stood side by side good enough. So, and then here I just moved away from the Main Street. One thing that I do when I build that I find helpful is positioning the building so that it's getting good sunlight, just from a color standpoint, and also just to be able to see what you're doing a little bit easier. So this is something that I frequently do. And this building is also one that is on Larimer Square in Denver. Again, not exact, but I took cues from it. It's been a struggle in this process to try to find new ways to use the windows that we have in the game, because there's not very much variety, and so it's constantly finding new ways to make them look different. And this is really the first time that I've used those windows with the shutters, but I needed to sink them into the wall anyway, and so the bonus was that those same little brick accents cover those shutters perfectly. And you end up with a nice thin window. And then I just added those little brick pieces. That's a big theme you'll see in a lot of sort of Victorian style brick buildings. They would find ways to provide detail with the brickwork, and some of the brickwork in those types of buildings is gorgeous if you look at it really closely. And so I did those, and then in a second here you'll see I do some additional brickwork to kind of fill in the gaps there. And this is probably, I feel like I say every building is my favorite after I finish one, but this one's definitely up there in terms of the town square. So, and the color here, so this color I actually pulled from, so I recolored one of the buildings. I'll show it when we're in the real time, but it was bright yellow, and it had sort of a like metal roof, and most people probably won't remember what I'm talking about, so I'll just show it when we're in the real time. But I recolored it to sort of a greenish color, like gray green, and I took that color and copied it to the accent pieces of this building, which is exactly, if you remember one of our first episodes when we talked about the Main Street, that's a technique that Disney uses where you take the main colors of certain buildings and tie them into accents in other buildings, and it provides visual cohesion. So I tried to do that as well in the town square.
I really enjoyed this building, I have to say. I love the color of the front.
Yes.
Oh
and
my gosh.
So the time lapse or the game quit on me in the middle of working on this building.
No.
So I don't know if other people are getting that problem, but a handful of people we've talked to have had the problem where when you're using the advanced move tool, the game will freeze on you.
I've had that a few times.
Yeah, so that's what happened to me in the middle of working on this. So, Bob Ross style happy accidents. I ended up tweaking it a little bit from what you're seeing here, so I'll show that when we get into the real time as well. What I did was I added more brick accents in that darker color of the little cross that's sort of at the top, and it definitely helps everything pop a little bit. So after doing that here and sort of adding the blue to those awnings, I tried to add little pops of color to the buildings in here, because otherwise a lot of it's pretty dark. But I think as a sort of visual whole, it ended up working out pretty well.
Yeah.
So, and this here, so instead of going with like a color cue that was similar to the Main Street, I did the Mansard Roof here, because all the other buildings were flat roofs in this area, and I thought by adding one sort of Mansard Roof in there, that with the dormers like this, that it would again just be another visual cue to the Main Street. So it's different, but still has the same visual cue. And then I copied those little square windows and turned them upside down to give them, so it looks like the windows actually have some panes in them instead of just one big piece of glass. So again, trying to find ways to be creative with what we have in the game.
Different angles, different colors, everywhere.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's really the only way to get the variety.
And then have it all tie in together. Yep.
Yeah, exactly. So one other thing. How close are we? Okay, we're almost down to the end of the time lapse here. So we'll get into the real time segment in a minute. But if you have a sharp eye, you probably noticed the bandstand in the center of Jubilee Square. There's an amazing drum set in there now, which is courtesy of SP Ridley.
Yes.
He's ridiculous with the art shapes.
So
and
good.
He built that for the Shy Guy World Competition Park, and it is insane. So we'll show that. I'll also include a link to his set in the description of the video, because I ended up just using the drum set and the mic stands, but he's got like a couple different instruments, and he's got a ridiculous piano, like a grand piano that is insanely detailed. I think in the episode that he showed it off in, I think he said that it actually has the correct number of keys.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, he's insane.
Yeah, it's ridiculous. So here I'm just trying to mess around and get that clock face to fit in there. It's a little bit big. I wish we just had the round clock face and not the sort of square border.
Yeah.
And then, for the remaining details, I'm just trying to, I'm repeating a lot of the cues here. Again, it's hard to try to get variety. And then I finished the bottom part of this about the same way that the other ones look like. But in the real time, I'll kind of show off the different colors that I use, and you can kind of see what I was talking about to the right there of adding that red color in, which is actually the color of the building to the left. So again, blending the colors so that it all kind of creates a cohesive face. But anyway, I think we're almost done with time lapse here, so we will get into the real-time segment and see you guys on the other side of this break. Okay, so welcome into the real-time segment here. So this is the finished Jubilee Square. Well, mostly finished. I'm sure there's like little details and stuff that I'll see as I continue to work in it, but off camera I did a ton of landscaping, finishing curbing, putting in tables and chairs. So this is Jubilee Supper Club, and I created this little like dining area here that's kind of sunken down. I added these planters as well all throughout the area here, and then so like I was talking about in the time lapse, adding, so you've got the blue in here and the signs and the awnings, and then in the umbrellas over here.
That just ties it all together.
Yep.
Wow.
So because it takes what otherwise would have been a very drab building and makes it look really pretty. So I moved the little caricature face paint stand as well, so it wasn't in this main thoroughfare. And then the other big thing that you and I were talking about was, well, you probably see it now.
Yeah.
There's no more Mr. Twister. Don't worry though, we'll show you. It's just been moved. So as we were kind of chatting in the park, we just felt really, well, I did at least, I felt really restricted by the river and where Mr. Twister was. Like, it wasn't really using this space very well, I don't think. So the benefit of what we have now is this is open for us to, add in more paths where the peeps can actually like get back into this area, and we can have more, sort of little shops and rides and things like that. So instead of, I was just initially going to have this whole thing be a seating area, but you suggested, we were kind of talking through it, and you were like, there almost needs to be a ride or something here.
Yep.
And that stuck with me. Like, I didn't want to just plop a ride down here, but then the more I was thinking about what you said, I was like, well, why don't we just open it up into an entirely new area? And I think it looks so much better. So you've got the little steps up there. I use the same technique that I did in the other areas where I put a shop down to get these little small stairs, and then just started to map it out. One thing that I looked at as well was getting into some Google Street Views of some parks and really seeing that the scale of the paths is actually pretty small, and they do a lot of stuff like this. Like there's, they'll have little trees with paths in between where you can break off in multiple directions. And so I tried to start this area by just using the 4-meter paths. So
if you haven't noticed yet, our main issue currently that we've kind of been trying to rectify this issue is it's a very long haul to get to a ride. So that's pretty much the reasoning for why we decided to start moving a few things around. Because, I mean, you go all the way down Main Street and you have still another trek to get to your first flat ride.
Right.
So
like this is a really long stretch, which when you're in there, I think it's fine. Like, it feels like a real park. It feels, it makes sense. And then especially having it being broken up here where you can come through the alleyway into the town square. And so the other reason why I didn't just plop a flat ride here is that if we didn't have paths going back into this area, in order to get there, you would have had to come all the way down here, wrap around the chairlift, and then get into this area. So the benefit of this is I'm sure we'll still have paths coming back in this area, but now the peeps have multiple entry points and exit points from whatever we end up putting over here.
Yeah, and the beauty of it is once we start building up that area to the left there, this does become an actual town square for this section. This is almost the centralized point for this area.
Right,
and that just works out perfectly.
For sure. So this is the building I was referencing earlier where I changed the color of it. It used to be a bright yellow and it just didn't mix well, but I kept blue accents, so it continues that theme in there. And then the color of this building is the same color as these accents in this one.
Oh yeah.
and down here as well. So and you'll see again, this wasn't in the time lapse, but the main details I added to this off camera was this brick piece here and down here.
Yep.
And it just for me that made it, I think. And then the Mansard Roof to kind of tie into Main Street again. And then here's SP Ridley's amazing drum set.
I love it. This looks so good.
Again, I'll put the links in the description to his workshop item, but it's ridiculous. And then I added some lights, some can lighting, and some speakers. Probably do more speakers than that, but it was just to get an idea. So
yeah, we kind of envision this area to be almost the nightlife area of Jubilee Gardens.
Yeah, like it's gonna have your major sit down restaurants, like sorry, the camera's freaking out. So like Jubilee Supper Club would be sit down, the market would be a sit down. One of these I'll probably be a shop, or two of them will probably be shops, like just trinkets and stuff, souvenirs, and then one of them will probably be a restaurant, and then this building will probably be like multifaceted as well. And I realized there wasn't a time lapse of this. So this is one that I kind of started working on a stream that I did a few weeks ago. Some of you probably tuned in for that. So I didn't want to make this one hyper detailed just because of kind of where it sits. It's off to the side. It's sort of just a filler building. And then, I added some of these planters to the alleyway, which is very much how it is in Fort Collins in their alleyway system. It's like they have these planters and they try to make it, inviting and stuff, mostly so at nighttime you're not like creeped out walking through an alley.
Yeah, exactly.
So,
but yeah, it looks fantastic. You've done a great job.
Yeah, I'm really happy with how it turned out. And like I said, I was able to kind of preserve the part count as well. It wasn't too bad. So, so that is the mostly completed Jubilee Square. Really happy with how it turned out, and it feels good to be done with most of the major buildings. So now we'll go look at where we moved Mr. Twister to. So, initially I didn't really know about what to do here. I knew that the coaster was a problem, but I didn't really want to move it for a couple reasons. So one, it would make sense that this would have been one of the earlier coasters in the park, and so therefore it would probably be closer to the entrance. But without doing a complete overhaul of the river, like there would have been no good position for it in and near the entrance, I don't think. So even though it would technically be probably an older coaster within the park, I think it's fine sitting back here. In fact, in Elitch Gardens in Colorado, which is the coaster that this is based off of, it's at the very far corner of the park. So it's not unusual that like the most prestigious ride in the park would be, tucked away like that. So yeah. And I just really love where it's positioned now too. I mean, you get down in this plaza, and this will probably be the deepest part of the park. We'll start moving to the right from here on out, but yeah, the sight lines around here are fantastic. Yeah, and go ahead. Oh, jeez. No, go ahead. Go ahead.
So I just really enjoy how this pretty much just seals everything in this area. When you're like sitting in the plaza, this is all you see, which is great. It's great. And the exit, the way you redid the exit there, awesome. Exit on both sides. It's fantastic.
Yeah, so if you remember from the previous episodes, I had this swapped. So the entrance was on this side with the Mr. Twister sign, and I had the queue the whole ride was sunken down. I was trying to make it not so tall, and so I kind of sunk it down from the path level. The benefit of where it is now is this whole area is a little bit lower in elevation than the front of the park, so I didn't really need to sink it down anymore. And so what I wanted to do, instead of having the queue in the front, was kind of tuck the queue back. So there's still a lot of detail I need to do on the queue, but it goes back behind the coaster in this sort of open area, which feels much more realistic to me, I think.
Yeah, it looks really good.
One little sort of Easter eggy type thing that I put in here. So the original Elitch Gardens, when I went to it as a kid, there was always like a couple of trees where people just stuck their gum to it. Like, and as a kid, that was like something that just stuck out to me as gross and funny also. And so that's what I did there. Like, people would probably hop this fence and stick their gum to the gum tree. So that's just a little kind of hearkening to my childhood that I threw
There
in
you
there.
go.
Yeah.
That's great. Yeah, I think I remember seeing stuff like that Darien Lake by me. Same thing.
Yeah.
People are gross.
So the other thing to touch on here too is we changed the textures of the park. So now the base texture is the leaves, and the benefit of that is that it forces you to decide where you would actually plant grass versus having grass everywhere. So using the various textures, I've tried to create like realistic looking sod where you've got some that's darker, would be like muddy kind of, and then you've got sand and rock, and then you mix that in with the leaves as well. So more to do there with landscaping. And then the only other thing I added was just a little restroom / locker area. And I meant to write it down so I got these lockers off the workshop. I meant to write down whose they were, but I'll find it and put it in the description.
Yep.
So they're really good scale. There's the main reason I used them, and they just, typically this is what you see is those gross blue lockers.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah,
So,
that looks great. That looks really great.
Yeah. So that is pretty much it. So again, lots of changes, but also, I think the last episode with some of the changes that we made, it was like, or I guess the last episode on my channel, I did all that work reorganizing the main street, and it just felt like I did a bunch of work for not much progress. And the nice thing about this is, though, even though I did a lot of rearranging of stuff, it feels like the park's at least progressing.
Yeah. It looks, I mean, I have to say, I wasn't so sure about the movement of Mr. Twister until I see it now, in all honesty. And it's so much better than it was.
Yes, I agree. Yeah, it's like the perfect spot for it.
It really is.
Especially at the end of that plaza, and I agree, just the way that the exit spills right out back onto the plaza, which is pretty typical of what you see in a lot of parks, is you don't typically have a very long a long path to get back to sort of a main area. So in some cases you do, but most of them it's like, maybe down a couple flights of stairs, and then there's like a gift shop, and then you're back out onto the main drag. So
yep.
But yeah, so that's pretty much it. Do you want to touch on anything you're kind of working on for the next episode?
Yeah, I mean, you can actually show off a few of the terrain pieces I've done if you want.
Oh yeah.
Just by around the train station.
Like. So I know you elevated a lot of this in here,
and just kind of extended
right?
the stonework that kind of goes off the train station. It kind of looks nice, and just kind of trying to tie it into everything, almost. And
the other thing that we were struggling with was getting. So the train is elevated pretty high, which we both like where it is, but then it's a struggle, let's get it back down to sort of the base grade.
Yep.
And so you did a good job here in sort of the backstage area. And then we also created this little grate thing. It needs more detail, but it's hard to kind of tell, but if you look, there's a slight gap between the cement and the water. So since we don't have the ability to do terrain outside of the park boundary, this is sort of the next best thing for that. So it gives the appearance that, the river is kind of coming from underground.
Yeah, that is the source of the Nile, we have found out.
Exactly.
Yeah. And then the occasional prototype building all over the place. And then I extended over here on the train station as well. A little bit of terrain editing, raising things up and such, but yeah, I got to do more work on that.
Yeah. So, more to progress there. We've talked about sort of some things that we might do in here a little bit differently to kind of open it up a little bit more, but it's constantly evolving. I'm sure this won't be the last thing that we kind of change and move around from its initial placement. But
now it's my turn to move the Mind Eraser. So
No, I like it there.
Yeah, me too.
And it's got good prestige too. I was looking at that actually because I was doing some cinematic shots and I was trying to get peeps kind of to move all over the areas of the park, and it's got good prestige.
Wow,
so
nice.
the peeps enjoy it.
They
I
like
think
it.
Mr. Twister is just a little
Yeah, you're a little bit over.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So those are this. It's funny because those are by far the two most popular roller coasters in the English Gardens too.
Yeah,
in real life.
That's really funny.
But so that does it for episode 9. Commando Santa's got the park next, and we're gonna shoot to have another episode out next week, right?
Yep.
Perfect.
I have
So
some
we should
things
be
I've already been working on before I decide to give up and give it to Ruble. So so hopefully by the end of the next week I will have a lot more to show off. So
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for watching, everyone. As usual, we'll have some cinematics at the end here, so check those out. And we'll see you guys on Commando's channel next week.
Have a good week, everyone.
See you guys.